I welcome you all for the third episode of pawn structures. In the last two episodes, we have been seeing the pawn structures related to doubled pawns and isolated pawns. And in this section, we shall see backward pawns. So to start with, what is a backward pawn? So in this particular position, the d6 pawn is the backward pawn. Say for example, this d6 pawn pretty much like it doesn't have any adjacent pawns, okay, closer to it, and the only adjacent pawn which is on e5 has already advanced. So this is lagging behind and hence it is called a backward pawn. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? So what are all the advantages and disadvantages? Let us see this in detail. So the first thing is, let's see the positive aspect of it. The d6 pawn is supporting the e5 pawn, so that is a good thing, and e5 pawn in return takes control of say d4 as well as f4 kind of vital squares. So now let's come to the drawback of it. This d6 pawn is a backward pawn, and whenever like there is a backward pawn, we can call that as weak if it can be attacked, or let's say for example if that file is pretty open for the opponent to attack. So the d file is open for or semi-open for white to attack this d6 pawn. So this is one. So it is considered as a weakness. And the next thing is, it can start with say taking control of the square in front of it. So the square in front of it is d5, okay, this particular square. So whether black can control this particular square, so if black is able to control this square which is before the pawn, we can call that as, like it is not a weakness. Okay, this pawn, this backward pawn on d6 is certainly not a weakness. If black is not able to control the square before the pawn, before the backward pawn, we can call that as weakness, as simple as that. So having said that, so what can we do in this position? Okay, what can be white's objective? So white on the other hand, like he will try to take control of the square before the pawn, t5. So already like he is taking control of the d5 square with the help of pawn, with the help of knight. So what he will try to do is, he will straight away take the knight to d5. So he will put the knight on d5 and he will take the hold of it. Okay, so having said that, so here he will start with d5. So he straight away blocks the pawn so that this pawn cannot move, and then what he will plan is, he will plan for something like c3, and then he will bring the knight to c2, and then he will bring the knight to e3. So why is he doing that? He is doing that in order to support the knight, as well as in case if there is an exchange of bishop to e6 or something, okay, if he tries to take the knight, the other knight can go and replace this particular knight square. So that is the intention behind it. So having said that, so this is kind of a weakness here. And one more thing to notice here is, you can also bring your pawn to g2 and probably like pawn to g3 and bring your bishop to g2, so that indirectly this bishop is taking control of d5 square. Okay, so that is yet another story. And one more thing to notice here is, so like there are two pieces which can defend this d5. Okay, so like I said, if black can able to take control of the square before the pawn, it is not a weakness. So pretty much, what are all the pieces that can take control of this vital d5 square? So when we think about it, we can say that, okay, the knight can take control of this d5 square. Probably knight can go back to say e7 in order to take control of it. This is one. Or the bishop can take control of it with bishop e6. So basically, there are two pieces which can take control of the square. So having said that, in case if these two pieces has got exchanged, then there will be not much of a support for this particular square. Okay, so black cannot take control of this particular d5 square. Okay, I hope this is clear, and let me move on to the next position. So the next position is, okay, so in this particular position, pretty much we can see that it is kind of a similar position, and both the structures like whatever that I showed in the previous game and this particular game can happen. Like we used to see these kind of pawn structures more often in Sicilian opening, like we will see more of a pawn structure similar to it. So as I said, if black is able to take control, here the d6 pawn is the backward pawn again, and if he is able to take control of this particular d5 square, then this d6 pawn is not a weakness by itself. Okay, in case if white goes on with knight d5, okay, and knight takes d5 and then pawn takes d5. Now let's ask the question, is d6 a weakness now? Certainly not, because it is not on a semi-open file, and this there is no open file. The pawn is blocking this file, so this pawn is not a weakness. And indeed, like, it is strengthening this e5 pawn. So this d6 pawn is not a weakness in this position. Okay, so all that it takes is, are we able to take control of, let's say if you are going to play for black in this particular d6 structure, we need to understand that, are we able to take control of the square before my pawn? Okay, so if you are able to take control of the square before your pawn, then I mean, like, it is not a weakness, otherwise it is a weakness. Okay, black needs to bring in his pieces in order to take control of this particular square. White, on the other hand, he will try to take control of this particular square so that this pawn will stay as a backward pawn, and he will uh, try to attack it and win it. So see you in the next video. Thank you.